The muted colors of dusk were just starting to settle over the city as I drove home after a long day at the office. Traffic was light, and I relished the quiet hum of the engine and the hypnotic stripe of headlights on the road ahead. This was my favorite time of day, a peaceful interlude before returning to my modest apartment. I took a sip of lukewarm coffee, glancing at the radio clock. 7:32 p.m. on a Tuesday, an ordinary day soon to melt into a familiar evening routine. I never saw the truck that barreled through the red light. Metal screeched against metal as it broadsided my car, the sickening crunch reverberating through my bones. My vision blurred red. When awareness returned, I was slumped sideways, my right arm pinned at an odd angle against the crushed door. I blinked slowly, trying to make sense of the smoke and shattered glass. The pain came next, intense and fiery, radiating from my trapped limb. I tried to move, to pull myself free, but a white-hot agony flooded every nerve. My right arm was mangled beyond recognition, the hand invisible beneath warped steel. I floated in and out of lucidity, glimpsing flashing lights and hearing muted voices. And then there was only darkness. When I finally woke in a hospital room, bandages swaddling the stump where my arm had been, I could focus on little else but the tingling, numb sensation ghosting across my missing fingers. My first weeks home passed in a haze of pain medication and unsettling dreams. I went through the motions, bills paid, laundry folded, meals reheated, but felt detached from it all. My apartment no longer seemed familiar, its walls closing in with memories that now rang hollow. The phantom tingling never ceased, my invisible fingers constantly flexing. At times, the sensation was so vivid, I would reflexively reach for something only to grasp at empty air. Once, I woke gasping from a nightmare and flicked on the bedside lamp, almost certain I could see the faint outline of a hand where my arm now ended in a bandaged stump. My sleep grew increasingly disturbed, my dreams filled with looming shadows barely outside my line of sight. I would jolt awake, soaked in sweat, certain someone was in the room with me. But only still darkness greeted my searching gaze. I told myself it was just stress, just trauma distorting my thoughts. But the prickling unease remained coiled inside me, winding ever tighter. The first time it happened, I stared in disbelief, heart hammering. A mug on the coffee table slid several inches across the smooth wood surface, propelled by some unseen force. I froze, afraid to even breathe. After an eternity, I reached out a shaky left hand to grasp it, feeling the solid ceramic curve under my palm. I sank back onto the couch, trying to steady my frantic thoughts. It's exhaustion playing tricks on your mind. Post-traumatic stress mixed with lack of sleep. Just focus on healing. But over the following weeks, more small, unexplainable events accumulated. Curtains fluttering without breeze, lights flickering, doors creaking open untouched. I dove deep into support forums and medical articles, searching for others who had experienced phantom limb phenomena manifesting in physical ways. Buried in a niche journal, I found a decades-old description of a man plagued by a phantom arm that seemed to move objects and leave messages in his handwriting. But his account ended abruptly, without resolution. Unease slithered down my spine. I glanced at the notepad on my coffee table, at the scattered words that had appeared there in the last few days, all penned in handwriting eerily like my own. Breathe, the most recent one read, or perhaps break. Desperate, I found the name of a renowned neurologist researching phantom limb syndrome and made an appointment. Dr. Simmons was affable but visibly skeptical as I haltingly described the events, his smile polite but strained. He suggested mirror therapy to help treat the phantom limb pain and manifestations. Sitting before the angled mirror, I positioned my left arm so it appeared seamless with the missing right one, like my body was whole. But as I focused on the reflection, my mirrored face changed. The eyes seemed to darken, the lips twisting into a cruel smirk I had never made. Shocked, I leaned closer, heart thundering. In the glass, my image mouthed words I couldn't decipher, its gaze boring into mine. Abruptly, it lunged, palms slamming against the inside of the mirror. I cried out, lurching backwards and knocking the stand over. The mirror shattered in a rain of jagged shards, the 100 fractured images of my face staring up from the ground. I sat motionless in the near-dark living room, every muscle tensed. For 2 nights I had felt it growing nearer, the air thickening until I could barely breathe. Now I waited, like a condemned man, for the inevitable. When it came, it was a form without form, a twisting distortion of reality. "I am the hollow where your arm once was," it rasped, its voice a chorus of inhuman whispers. "I am the vessel of your anger, your pain unspoken, your unfulfilled desires." Every primal instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to lift my chin. "You are not me," I stated, proud of the steadiness in my tone. "You are an intruder here, and it is time for you to leave." I felt then a surge of energy race down from my shoulder through where my arm had been. The entity contorted, wavering like a mirage. It unleashed an ear-piercing screech that seemed to shatter the world around me. And then it winked out, leaving only empty space and silence. The nightmares and tingling sensations ceased after that night. But in the quiet moments, I sometimes wondered if in banishing the entity, I had also lost some essential part of myself. My life resumed its steady cadence, but I knew deep down I was irrevocably changed, marked forever by my brush with the strange and unexplainable that lurked just beyond the veil of normalcy. The deafening roar of machinery was my daily soundtrack, the familiar rattling and grinding of the packaging plant. I moved through my workday in a comfortable daze, disengaged from the chaos around me. Another shift done, another day closer to retirement, until in an instant my world collapsed. A loud bang, screams, searing pain, and when I regained foggy awareness, my legs were gone. Crushed beyond salvation in an industrial accident, reduced to mangled flesh and splintered bone. Phrases filtered through the medicated haze those first days in the hospital. Amputation, medical leave, workers' comp, and of course, that innocuous-sounding term, phantom pain, used to describe the fiery agony flaring through my missing limbs. At home, navigating a ground-floor apartment refitted for my new reality, I clung to the promise that the pain was temporary. But the sleek prosthetics attached below my knees felt alien and unnatural. The ghostly presence of my severed legs persisted, their phantom impressions twitching with distorted nerve signals. Over weeks of restless, dream-filled nights, the first signs of strangeness appeared. Flickering lights, barely heard whispers, objects shifting untouched. I dismissed it as stress, my mind playing tricks in the shadowy spaces between wakefulness and sleep. Until the night. I startled awake and felt the unmistakable sensation of footsteps, the flecks of muscle and bone no longer there. I listened, heart pounding and breath shallow, as the disembodied steps moved slowly around my bed before fading away. In the light of day, seized by a desperate need for answers, I researched the history of my apartment. The previous resident had been an occult scholar and researcher named Elias Locke, who reportedly vanished under mysterious circumstances. In a neglected closet, I discovered the remnants of Locke's esoteric library, arcane tomes filled with strange symbols and dire spiritual warnings. "You're grasping for meaning where there is none," I told myself. But deep down, my fears seemed less far-fetched with each new incident. Had I also inherited Locke's unfinished business with the world beyond the veil? Feeling increasingly unmoored, I reached out to Dr. Catherine Redwood, a parapsychologist known for her pioneering research on trauma and paranormal phenomena. She listened gravely as I described the disembodied footsteps, objects moving untouched, the vivid phantom pain. "You are not alone in this," she said, "but I urge you not to ignore what's happening. These phenomena can gather strength if left unchecked. She taught me words of power, an incantation to sever paranormal connections. Just a precaution, she assured me, but her eyes held an urgency that betrayed her stoic manner. I clung to the lifeline of Dr. Redwood's help, fortifying myself for whatever lay ahead. But some primal, instinctual part of me sensed the worst was yet to come. The night arrived as I feared it would, bringing with it a violent tearing of the veil between this world and the unknown. As I lay paralyzed in bed, my phantom legs twitched and moved of their own volition, puppeteered by an unseen intelligence. My surroundings warped sickeningly, the room stretching into impossible shapes and dimensions. Then, I was wrenched into a lightless, cavernous void, utterly alone save for a lingering sense of being watched. From the shadows, it took form, an entity, humanoid but flickering, like a projection on the verge of failure. When it spoke, the sound was devoid of humanity. "I am a soul caught between worlds, neither living nor dead," it rasped, "and you are a body rendered incomplete. Together, we can be made whole." Tendrils of icy terror snaked through me. I opened my mouth to speak, but only a strangled gasp emerged. I was utterly defenseless against this spectral intruder. But as the entity drifted closer, that small core of defiance within me awoke. I forced myself to focus, recalling Dr. Redwood's words of power. Though my voice shook, I began the incantation. The specter recoiled with an ear-piercing shriek, its body fracturing like a monstrous mirror. It clawed desperately toward me but continued disintegrating until only swirling dust remained. With a gut-wrenching lurch, I snapped back into my bedroom, every nerve alive with shock. After that night, the uncanny occurrences ceased, leaving only questions that science could not yet answer. In the following years, I devoted myself to studying the intersection between the physical and paranormal realms, seeking insights that might help others caught in that perilous divide between worlds. My path was forged by pivotal loss and irreversible transformation. But I move forward now on steady footing, knowing there are always those who will help light the way forward, even through the darkest shadows. The construction site was alive with noise, a cacophony of machinery, shouts, and hammering. Perched high on the scaffolding, absorbed in the focused work of welding joints together, the chaos seemed far removed. Up here, it was just me, the hiss of the torch, and this emerging steel skeleton that would soon be the city's gleaming new tower. I leaned into the flame, squinting against the glare, and that's when I heard the bolt snap. The scaffolding shuddered, tilting wildly. I staggered, arms flailing, tools clattering over the edge. With a sickening lurch, the structure gave way beneath me. I was airborne, time dilating, the ground hurtling toward me. I collided brutally with the table saw stationed below. Its serrated teeth churned to life, shredding through flesh and bone with indifference. The pain was unspeakable, vision going white, nerves screaming. When awareness returned, I was crumpled on the concrete, the saw sputtering red and my life force draining rapidly away. My limbs were tattered ruins of tissue and shattered bone. I stared in numb disbelief at the bloody stumps where my arms and legs had been just moments before. As my heartbeat stuttered, the construction site swirled into a grim kaleidoscope of faces and machinery, reality fading like a distant echo. Then, darkness took me. I emerged from the void into a blaze of antiseptic light and urgent voices. Fragments filtered through. Surgery, blood loss, amputation. Weeks blurred together in a haze of painkillers and agonizing procedures. My limbs ended in bandaged stumps that wept endless trails of blood and plasma. Phantom pain tore through me as though the missing parts were still there, contorting in the saw's teeth. They spoke of prosthetics, rehabilitation, occupational therapy. But no technology could replace what I had lost or rebuild the man I used to be. The doctor's platitudes about recovery and adaptation rang hollow. In both body and mind, I was irrevocably diminished, carved away by that gruesome machinery into a sliver of the person I had been. The hospital discharged a broken shell of a human, wholly unprepared for the surreal ordeal still to come. At home, the rooms felt smaller, steeped in a dense stillness. I swung my truncated limbs experimentally, maneuvering my new wheelchair through halls now choked by shadows. At first, it was subtle signs, pinpricks and tingling where my phantom limbs should have been. Then came the sensation of being watched and prodded by invisible hands. Objects around my apartment shifted inexplicably. Furniture dragged across floors, lights switching on and off untouched. Each incident left me trembling, dreading what might come next in this personal hell. Whatever entity had attached itself to me was growing bolder, exploiting my amputated stumps as gateways into this reality. I was helpless, broken in both body and spirit, too hollowed out to fight back. The night the whispering started was the most harrowing yet. From the darkest corner, a voice hissed, raspy and inhuman. "You are now only fractions. 4 empty spaces to fill. 4 roles to assume. This fragile form will be the vessel through which I take shape." My wheelchair skittered back, buffeted by cold air. Objects flew in crazed orbits, focused on my stumps like particles toward a black hole. My severed limbs were becoming conduits, I realized with building dread. I thrashed against unseen restraints as cloying smoke poured from my bandaged stumps. The presence pressed in from all sides, vile and eager, violating the vulnerable hollows of my amputated body. This gruesome spectacle was an unholy covenant, a deal struck in darkness, with my gory wounds as entries through which this sinister entity could gain a foothold in our world. As the room dimmed, I felt overpowering jolts of pain at the tip of each phantom limb. The entity was trying to rip through, I realized, and I was no more than a shell it intended to inhabit. But I had endured enough violation. In my mind's eye, I visualized my own strength stemming the bloody flow from each stump, slowing the entity's advance. The apparition howled in fury as its smoky tendrils withdrew, forced back by my sudden resistance. The room snapped back into stillness, leaving only my ragged breaths and the echoes of that roar in my ears. I had survived the battle, but my role was now clear. This gruesome trauma had opened a vulnerability, weakening the veil between worlds. As the entity's would-be vessel, it was my burden to stand sentinel, vigilant against its inevitable return. My life would never be the same after encountering the sinister forces eager to breach the fragile boundary. But I refused to be rendered passive by loss. Even diminished, some inner fire yet remained, ready to face the darkness when it fell once more.